G'day Mike, Kangaroos continues, and today we have an English language episode with Mel. Please meet Mel, the king of barbecue. Mel lives in Australia since the time Australian dollar was introduced, and he has a vast experience living here and knowing lots of stuff about Australia. I hope he'll share his experience with us today.
Most certainly. G'day. Привет.
So probably let's start with a bit of a history. When gum trees were high and apple was just a fruit. Do you remember your journey to Australia? Was it by sea at that time or by plane?
Yeah, I remember it well. Yeah, I was just 11 years old, but my family, 5 children and my parents, we were one of the lucky ones actually, in that we flew to Australia. Because my father was flown out by his company because they needed to open a factory, and my father was the only person trained for this particular job, and they couldn't open the factory until got here. By sea, it was 4 weeks, and that I think was to Fremantle in Western Australia, and we needed to get to Melbourne. So they wanted him out as quickly as possible, so they flew us out.
So they organised everything.
And that was great, and we'd never been on a plane before, of course. And but in those days it took 36 hours to fly, and 7 stops.
7 stops, oh.
Not including the last stop, so 8 if you include the last stop, yeah.
Oh, that's a lot.
From London to Melbourne.
Was it through Asia or through Africa?
Well, it was from it was London to Rome, Rome to Delhi, to Rangoon, Hong Kong, Manila, to Darwin, to Sydney, to Melbourne.
Oh, 3 stops in Australia even. That's a lot. And was it the same plane, or you just changed planes every time?
It was the same plane all the way to Sydney.
Wow.
And they just had to, they just keep refueling it.
Yeah. Was it a prop plane with the propellers, or the jet?
No, it was a jet. Yeah, yeah.
One of the first jets, maybe even common.
It was, in those days, it was a BOAC, which went out of business or got taken over by probably British Airways or something like that. So sometime later, but.
Anyway, that was quite an experience to travel that long, so many stops.
Yeah,
was it interesting for a kid to be on the plane and having all those takes-offs and landings?
Oh yeah, fascinating. Oh well, actually, not so fascinating, because in those days there was a lot of air sickness.
So you didn't fly above the clouds; it was still low-level flights.
Well, we were above the clouds, but there was still a lot of air sickness. I just don't know whether what causes air sickness or whatnot. But my sister, I recall, who was 9 years old at the time, she didn't travel well, and she threw up on the train from home to London, and then she threw up several times as we were taking off in the aeroplane. So
not a good experience.
The old air sickness bag, and yes, very pleasant experience.
And so you arrived in Australia. How did you find it?
Well, we turned right at Hong Kong, and that's pretty much how we found it. No, sorry, I'm joking. How did we find it? Very, very different. Very different. in a number of ways.
Was it just the climate, or people are different here? People were different to your home country?
The climate was very different. Actually, the people not so much so in those days, because even though 12,000 miles or whatever kilometres, 20,000 kilometres, whatever, from England, England was still considered in those days to be the mother country.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, a lot of similarities. There was what they used to call cultural cringe in those days, where everybody sort of was beholden to the Queen, and they used to bow down to royalty and it was like Australians felt themselves to be a little bit inferior in a cultural way to England. And yet, funnily enough, I mean, it was only 20 years after the Second World War. I was born 10 years after the Second World War, and Australia didn't have to go through that experience. So, whereas Britain was largely rebuilding, Australia wasn't. So, it was very much different in that way. But a lot of things, as I said, were built on the English way of life, even though it was a totally different climate, totally different part of the world.
Did you have any language issues, actually? Because you spoke the main language of this country, but was it different to you? Are people speaking differently here?
None whatsoever. It was, you could fully understand everything that was said. It just sounded different. In fact, I used to get fun made of me, the way I used to speak. It wasn't like I could make fun of the Australian kids because there were too many of them. I was by myself, so. And the Australian kids were a fair bit bigger than me. So.
Were there many kids that didn't speak English at that days, or had troubles with this?
Do you know, in all of my days at school in Australia, I don't recall ever meeting anyone that couldn't speak English. Not a single student.
Yeah, obviously it's a bit different these days.
Very, very different.
But every teacher has Google Translate on their smartphone.
Oh yeah.
And when they encounter a person who they don't understand fully, they quickly get it out, get automatic language recognition, ask them to say something, and then they just use this to talk to each other.
The only people that we ever met that couldn't speak English were some of the parents of the students who'd migrated following the Second World War. There were a lot of Italians, what was then Yugoslavia. They were the main two Greeks from those sort of areas. And yeah, the parents sort of had troubles, but of course all the kids were just
no problems at all.
No problem at all. They picked up the language very quickly, and like I said, never met a single one that couldn't speak English. So.
You probably missed your friends quite a lot when you moved to Australia.
Definitely, yeah. For the first little while, and I hated the thought of even leaving England. The idea of getting on a plane was was great excitement, but that was the only thing. They had to, my parents almost had to drag me kicking and screaming to leave England. And the thought of leaving all my friends behind, it hurt a lot, and I kept in touch with them for some time. Still keep in touch with a couple of them, even all these years later.
Yeah. All those old school mail, letters.
I'm sorry?
Did you write each other letters?
Oh yeah, for some time, yeah, and then one by one, slowly they dropped off, or I got lazy, and you know, we just stopped writing, you know, whatever, as kids do.
Yeah, because these days it's a bit different.
And you soon get, you know, your new friends, and yeah.
Was it easy to make new friends here?
It was quite easy. Children do. Children just seem to, you know, they'll lose one friend one day, they'll find another friend the next day.
Yeah.
Best friends for life one day, and then somebody else's best friend for life the next day.
Were the games much different that you played here and compared to those you played in England?
Yeah, much different. Much different. I mean, even the sports games, other than cricket, which was played in both England and Australia, then there was little else that was common, because Australian, living in Melbourne, there was Australian rules football, which is now just commonly called AFL, and of course back home in England it was football, or as it's referred to here more commonly, soccer. In those days it was only referred to as soccer. Now it's becoming more commonly called football again. But yeah, so the only sport that was similar was cricket.
So you had to learn a lot of stuff, like new rules, new games.
Yeah, not so much. I didn't for a long time. I didn't take to Australian rules football. My brothers did more than me. I used to play soccer. We used to kick around at school. We'd always find kids that could kick a soccer ball around, and when at home, then, well, I have 3 brothers. I mean,
that's good.
3 brothers and a couple of English guys lived very close, and we'd just play out on the road, you know, as we did. Yeah, always somewhere to play.
Was the curriculum at school different to England?
Curriculum?
Yes. The way the school works, I believe not. It should be almost all
actually
inherited.
it was almost. It was quite identical. Particularly in the high school. We had in those days high school and technical school. I went to a technical school which teaches more trade, woodwork, metalwork, that sort of thing, which was a big mistake. But my parents decided that that's where I should go. But you would find that the high schools were almost exactly the same, even down to the languages. They would teach geography and history, and the history would be mainly British history. The languages would be a choice of either French or German or both.
Yeah, so
all this far away from. I mean, you can understand in England or Europe why you would want to learn to speak French or German. But in Australia, well, but they did. But it was
was it
much different then.
Was it a stressful experience for the first year or two here, or it was more like an adventure for you?
There was an element of stress, particularly in the first few months of going to school, because I was put into a year that was like 12 months ahead of where I should have been. The kids, like, I was 11 years old, most of the kids were almost 13, 12 going on 13. And I was just this tiny little English kid, and they were like, it was like living in the land of the giants.
Yeah, that would be quite an experience.
And of course, they'd never weren't used to too many English kids, and I was made to go to school in my old school uniform from England, so really stood out in the crowd when I really didn't want to, you know. So yeah, that was quite stressful, and even my first year, I repeated or went back to starting again at technical school, and there was one particular English teacher who took great delight in making me stand up in class and pronouncing words in my English tongue and comparing them to the Australian way of speaking, and which of course caused great delight for all the kids. They all thought it was very funny, but it wasn't funny for me. Yeah, if they did that sort of thing these days, they would be in a lot of trouble. But times were different.
So, was it a fun experience to grow up in Australia, or not so?
Yeah. Other than that first little bit of a learning curve, it was fun. Yeah. You know, I mean, I grew up with many. Well, all the kids I grew up with, really, apart from the odd one or two, were Australian. Yeah, just they accepted me as I was, and we were just friends, you know.
That's great. That's actually what you need when you're a child and
absolutely, yeah,
get along with others. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was great. But you know, it's also a matter of finding similar interests too.
Yeah, which kids do have in common usually.
Whether it could be through playing soccer, or through playing cricket, or through just music. I mean, music was a great leveler, because of course I was just starting into my teen years and just getting into music and modern music and the Beatles and all of those sort of bands, and the English bands are really, really popular. So and we just found common ground in music. And kids find common ground very easily. Yeah.
That's good. Well, moving a bit to some your local experience as an adult, the whole entire experience here in Australia. Well, everyone thinks that Australia is full of different killing creatures, killing plants, killing everything. Everyone who comes here, they're afraid of lots of different stuff. Spiders, crocodiles, snakes, whatever, dog bears, bunyips, whatever. Everyone is afraid of that.
Bunyips.
Yeah. Have you ever met any?
Drop bears have proved fairly elusive. They tend to roam in the mountain lofty ranges in South Australia, I believe. Yes, don't see too many of them around here. No, to be honest, snakes. Now, I would have seen, and of course we're talking about in their natural habitat, in the wild. I probably wouldn't have seen more than 5 snakes. If I've seen 5. In all the time I've been in Australia.
So I'm quite lucky.
Live,
I've seen 3 of them.
I've seen a couple of snakes when we've been out walking. I've killed 2 venomous snakes. That's probably pretty much the only snakes I've seen in the wild. Spiders, yeah, redbacks, find them. If you go looking for them, you can find them pretty much anywhere. But other than that, other than the huntsmen you can find pretty much anywhere too if you go looking for them.
One came to my place actually. I'll probably put this in a video. It was quite a hairy and big one, but they're pretty safe actually.
I was going to say they're far more scary looking than what they are. My father, he used to. You always get huntsmen in new houses, and of course we were terrified when it first came.
Yeah, it's just such a big one.
And he would catch them, pick them up, he'd put them on his arm and let them run up his arm.
Yeah.
And we was Dad, you're kidding. And he'd think it was funny,
Yeah, I've seen many people doing this on YouTube.
So I still would never do that today, but yeah. But other than that, yeah, I've not seen any. Crocodiles, obviously, unless you go up to the far north end, or I haven't seen a shark. Don't want to see a shark.
Yeah, definitely in the wild.
Haven't yet come across any poisonous jellyfish. So yeah, not many.
What about more cute koalas and kangaroos? As people again tend to think they live all across the city, like jumping all across the road and the things.
Okay, koalas. I've seen 1 or 2 in the wild in my life. Down in Victoria. I actually saw one when I was working at a service station in Brisbane, running down the middle of the road.
Running koala, that's the thing you see only once in your lifetime.
Trotting. It was actually, I don't know where it had come from, but fortunately a police car came down the road and managed to catch the thing. I was so worried it was going to get run over, but that was a very strange sight. Kangaroos I wouldn't call cute. Not in the wild. Yeah. Not in the wild. And the ones that you can scratch and get up close to, well, they're so domesticated and used to humans that but they can be quite nasty in the wild. But I've certainly seen plenty in the wild. Just out at Greenbank, for instance, we used to have a property out there, and seen 1 or 2 of them just hop across the property until such times we put fences up. And there's also the Greenbank Army barracks there. Do you know that? You could go out early any morning and you would see lots and lots of kangaroos in there, and then they just seem to disappear.
A common kangaroo spot here in south of Brisbane is at Overcool, where the correction centre is. Yeah. Hundreds of them.
I used to actually live at Park Ridge, and look, just there's a vacant block directly across the road, and you could look across there every morning. You'd see a family of kangaroos there. But now, of course, they've built big roads through there, and they've all disappeared.
So they're not as many as they used to be.
It's like anywhere. The more
the more city expands,
you take away.
Well, here.
It's whether it's city expanding or whether you take away the natural forest habitat.
But at least you help them a bit with lizards, with water dragons.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, I have quite a family of water dragons that live out here now. There's at least 4 of them, and they come down and swim in my bowl of water that I leave out for them. They actually come swimming.
That's nice.
Yeah, that's the latest thing. So yeah, that's quite good. But you can go there. You can go to the parks. You go to Roma Street Parkland, and you'll see water dragons all over the place.
Yeah.
You can go you'll see scrub turkeys.
Turkeys are everywhere.
Everywhere.
You just need to watch out.
Oh, and if you turn your back for a second, they'll be into your food. So different places that are not too far away, and Rome's Fleet is, well, that's right in the middle of town. So
are there any particular things that you like about Australia and particular things that you don't like about Australia, like summarizing the whole experience? And
actually, there's some things that create kind of a paradox, if you know what I mean. For instance, I like that Australia is isolated in a way, because it's far away from all the
conflicts, all the politics of the world.
Basically, yeah. But at the same time, I mean, and we don't know for how much longer that can last. But at the same time, that's something I don't particularly like, because it means you're far away from the rest of the world.
Yes.
As if you want to travel and that sort of thing. What do I like? Well, to see again the climate, but then the climate can be at such extremes.
Yeah. What we've seen recently with the heat
unbelievable!
Waves, floods and all the rest.
Massive floods up in North Queensland, bushfires in the lower down in Queensland a few months ago, bushfires in Tasmania just last week, massive heat waves, 40+ degrees across huge areas,
hot.
and drought, and such extreme, and it seems to be getting worse every year. So people don't believe in climate change. I don't know what sort of convincing they need, but anyway, I won't get into the politics of it. Speaking of politics, I very much like our political system. Doesn't mean to say I like politicians.
Yeah, but
I like the political system. It works. It's great.
Yeah, which is important actually, that you could actually influence them in a bit.
Yeah, I mean, and we've got a democracy. You've got freedom of speech that a lot of countries don't have. A lot of people aren't able to voice their opinion without fear. And that's fantastic. There are policies that I don't like, which is not the political system. Policies are created by the politicians. Like our immigration policies, I don't agree with, but then you know, that's my opinion. So, what else? Just the general wide open spaces, the cleanliness of Australia, I think, is something that's is wonderful.
Yeah,
compared to some places.
That's amazing how good the places are where you get. It seems that they're being kept in order by people, but no one around, basically. And it's really good that people are trying to keep it in order. When you go there, you just pick some garbage, it's there, and just to try to keep it as clean as it was.
People, I think people just try to do the right thing. That's just the way they're brought up. I don't know. But I've been to other countries where things aren't so clean. And people just don't seem to care. You know, so,
maybe that has to do something that a lot of people come into Australia by their own will, and they're trying to live here as they want their lives to be. It's not like you're born here and you have to live here. It's like your choice, and you're trying to do your best.
I guess.
To support
I mean, you know, we've also got laws in place, and laws get if people do the wrong thing.
Yeah, they're quite tough sometimes.
They are, yeah. Just there's less corruption and less, you know, less sort of backhanders that can go to that you can sort of buy your way out of trouble, and that's another thing I love is the lack of corruption.
Yeah, everything's pretty straightforward, and if you want to do something, you could always get those laws, read them, and everything would be according to those laws. It's not something that is not spoken, not written, that you need to know.
There are checks and balances in place, and that's again the political system. But I think there are places overseas where there's the occasional blind eye gets turned. They don't seem to get away with it so much here. People are held accountable for their actions.
Yeah, that's actually the most important part. It's not about the toughness or how tough the law is. It's about that it just works for everyone.
Yeah, there are probably lots of other things that I like. Probably some. Oh, that's another thing. Would be our local produce, our fruit, our vegetables, our food in general, meat. Our
meat is amazing.
Standards of hygiene. I think are amongst the greatest in the world.
That's true.
Yeah, and that, you know, that is just fantastic. We've got sort of pretty much everything, and of course we're surrounded by oceans, so we get fantastic seafood, and like I said, there's probably a lot of other things I could think of, but we're not doing too badly.
Is there anything in particular that you miss about that was left in the 20th century for Australia, that something is not here anymore? Like the time without internet and mobile phones.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say, you know, I remember the mobile phone when it first came out. We thought, oh, this will never take off. I remember my brother having one of the first mobile phones, and it was like a brick.
Yeah, big brick.
It was. It's massive, great big thing. Oh, it'll never take off. Oh, what's the point of it? You've got to have somebody else on the other, you know, somebody else with another one to be able to make a phone call, you know. Now look at it. More mobile phones in Australia than people, I think. And then, of course, then it started to take off, and then I got my first mobile phone, and I thought, oh, this is great. But yes, technology has just outstripped me in leaps and bounds, and that's just my age group. Give the same technology to young kids, and they're fine with it. But I think it's not just the technology. I think if you look back, if you go back to those days, it was a much simpler time. It was
more straightforward.
Simpler, and life was slower. It was easier. It was not so rushed. People actually worked less. You know, going back many years before the 40-hour week came in, there was no limit on what you could be made to work, and then they brought in the 40-hour week, and then they brought in the 35-hour week, and you know, where people would have to have a half day off every week, and I still think that's in place in a lot of industries. But now you see a lot of people now that are working where it's gone up, and it's now 45 and 50-hour week, and 60-hour week is not uncommon.
It's like with lawyers, they start their day at 7 a.m. they end at 12 p.m. and or 12 a.m.
Oh, sure, sure, there's money to be made, but it comes at it has to come at the expense of something.
Especially your time, which is most valuable thing.
Yeah. But yeah, so those sort of things, like the extra work, and comes at the expense of extra family time, leisure time. As I said, it was a far more simpler life back then, and yeah, it would be nice.